The Great Wave off Kanagawa is one of the most widespread pieces of art in the entire world. Granted, it was crafted as a woodblock, which is meant to be copied to other surfaces time and time again. Anyway, the Great Wave off Kanagawa, sometimes referred to as Under the Wave off Kanagawa, was painted by Katsushika Hokusai in 1831, when he was 71 years old, and is part of a larger series known as the 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Hokusai changed his surnames many times in life, as it seems he was not born with one. Katsushika, the surname I'm using today, is actually the name of the town he is from. He was an amazingly prolific artist and was a major player in ukiyo-e, which focused on the lives of everyday Japanese and could present scenes from stories to cultural happenings, even coming to depict landscapes. The prints became more affordable and widespread over time. Hokusai was working at the height of their popularity. These prints were usually divided between many workers, an artist who designed the piece, the person who would carve the wood, and the printer who would apply ink to the press. Printing these pieces could actually take a whole day. It had to be done right. One slip up and he would have to start over. Hokusai himself suffered through many personal tragedies in his time, such as losing his wife and having many monetary issues, and outside tragedies such as the Tempo rice famine. Fortunately, he was taken care of by many others as he aged. During this time as well, Japan was nearing the end of its Edo period. The Edo period did see Japan increase in wealth and in tourism, allowing its works to be seen on a global stage. It actually spread into Europe and influenced the Impressionist movement. The Japanese woodblock prints had an impact on Western art and is visible in the work of the Impressionists. This can be seen through the painting and printmaking produced during the 19th century, showing that this piece and others like it has a cultural impact, not just on how much it is seen, but how it has influenced those who have seen it, challenging the European-centric worldview. Even to this day, many things thought of as being Western are actually pulled from Japanese storytelling and art. Hokusai's woodblock is polychrome, a more difficult technique to accomplish within that field, yet the piece is masterfully done. Allegedly, this piece is actually supposed to be looked at inverted, and is supposed to be read right to left, as Japanese is read, making the waves more apparent and sudden seeming, making it so it's not so much the boat sailing into the wave, but the wave sailing into the sailors, crashing into the portrait where the sailors are caught in the thick of it. However, I want to clarify that I literally could find no actual source backing up this claim. Yes, I had one article, but I didn't have a citation for it. Not to mention, I even checked the Wikipedia page, which lays out the same claim, and its citation was from the article I had already read. Hokusai's signature always appears in the top left in this series, as it does in this woodblock as well. So I'm not really sure why this is thought, because yes, Japanese does read right to left, but this is a painting. A viewer can view a painting as they see fit. Regardless, it is always fun to flip works of art around to change how one has viewed it, because it can reveal new ways of seeing it. I won't say this can disprove the notion altogether, but his other paintings depicting the ocean and waves in specific tend to have them coming from the left, other than view of Honboku off Kanagawa, but it does prove he wasn't adverse to having the wave come into the image from the left. Moving on, the work is stylized, basing its entire structure off of this stylization. The waves form from the ocean and crest so its foam becomes claws that are reaching out towards the people caught on the boats, bracing and hanging on for dear life. The sky above is a foreboding gray, further pushing the tone of this image in its desperation, enforcing the precariousness of the situation, as opposed to something like a blue sky that would denote a peaceful setting, and may give this scene a sense of playfulness over danger. It's set in the middle of a scene that is happening. The boats are caught up in the wave, but they can't escape now, they have to face it, but we don't get to see the aftermath, we are only shown this brief instant of time. What is striking too is that the woodblock, as mentioned previously, is a view of Mount Fuji. Seeing Mount Fuji in real life is an experience. Everyone understands that it is big, but actually seeing it, one realizes that it is big, really, really big. It is indescribable the way it comes off the landscape, presented itself as an insurmountable monument of nature's power over the world. It is a foundational and unchanging part of the world, standing still amidst the crashing waves that sailors are facing. The waves are dark blue and do not betray what is underneath, a world of the unknown that is unsurvivable. Yet the mountain displays this too, white on top just like the waves it is portrayed with, and dark on the bottom, a different unknown, but unknown all the same. Mount Fuji's importance in Japanese culture cannot be understated. It has been painted and referenced countless times, and it can be argued that its significance has to do with its sheer stature. It is something Japan could be proud of, especially during the Edo period, which saw Japan realizing the rest of the world was rapidly modernizing. Mount Fuji was something to cling on to as the times evolved, and the book Sanshirō, published in the Meiji era by Şōseki Natsume, who is sometimes referred to as the father of modern Japanese literature, a character that Sanshirō meets on the train refers to Mount Fuji in this light while speaking to him. It was written in the early 1900s and reflects Japan's fear of being inferior to the outside world. It was portrayed as ironic that the only thing they could be proud of, that stood above all that in the rest of the world, was something they played no part in creating. We can beat the Russians, we can become a first-class power, but it doesn't make any difference. Just look at the houses we live in, the gardens we build around them. They're what you expect from faces like this. You've never seen Mount Fuji? We go by it a little further on. Have a look. It's the finest thing Japan has to offer, the only thing we have to boast about. The trouble is, of course, it's just a natural object. It's been sitting there for all time. We didn't make it. Sanshirō attempts to push back this notion lightly. But still, Japan will start developing from now on at least. To which the man replies, Japan is going to perish. This startles Sanshirō. The idea of someone saying this in his hometown, Kumamoto, is ridiculous. He thinks to himself, people would have been beaten on the spot, perhaps even arrested for treason for saying such things. Now, a little side note here. I've never been to Kumamoto, but my Japanese teacher is actually from there. Obviously, this book was written 100 years ago, so Kumamoto has changed. Anyway, it's in the south of Japan in Kyushu, and especially then far separated from the cultural shift occurring in Tokyo that was leaking into the rest of Japan. This book reflects a morphing Japan, one where the increasing nationalism, while not yet in full swing, was creeping into the lives of the Japanese now that they had defeated Russia, a European power, in war. Meanwhile, Tokyo is fast becoming an international city and filling with people. It's becoming the cultural core of Japan, where pursued Western ideas, clothing, art, and foods begin entering into Japanese culture. With this comes modernization, that the military powers of Japan take full advantage of, and the consuming ideas of capitalism. Let's read another passage from Sanshirō. Tokyo was full of things that startled Sanshirō. First, the ringing of the streetcar bells startled him, and then the huge numbers of people that got on and off between rings. Next to startle him was Marunouchi, the busy commercial center of the city. What startled him most of all was Tokyo itself, for no matter how far he went, it never ended. Everywhere he walked there were piles of lumber, heaps of rock, new houses set back from the street, depressing old storehouses half demolished in front of them. Everything looked as if it were being destroyed, and at the same time, everything looked as if it were under construction. The sheer movement of it all was terrible. Natsume's work here exemplifies two competing notions. One is Japan heading into the future stronger than ever on the back of modernity, while at the same time being built on a foundation that's too flimsy to support this growth. Natsume sees potential in modernity, while simultaneously seeing it as dismantling the community that once existed, isolating everyone to themselves. As he says in his novel Kokoro, loneliness is the price we have to pay for being born in this modern age, so full of freedom, independence, and our own egotistical selves. This relates back to Natsume's views of Japan. He had studied in the United Kingdom, a very isolating time in his life, and carrying back what he learned, he found it difficult to readjust to the Japanese way of life. In fact, he seemed to start despising both. To him, Japan was a nation so built on its ambition to finally outdo the rest of the world that it wasn't willing to look inward at what it was that was actually keeping them back. Japan's idea of outdoing the world was to join in on what every other power was doing, invasion and exploitation. He directly confronts the Japanese government for sending so many men to die in Manchuria, unable to justify the war when thinking of the human cost, not to mention that many of his books focus on downtrodden people short on money, that they can't focus on their interpersonal lives with their monetary issues. And what stands above all this is Mount Fuji, that Natsume purposefully chooses to include, criticizing the country for being proud of something that it had no part in creating, something that has existed before them and will probably be there after. It can be hijacked for any message, but it doesn't change what Mount Fuji is. When Natsume points out this discrepancy, he discredits Japan's violent nationalist movement in one swing. One more quote. The man said, "Tokyo is bigger than Kumamoto, and Japan is bigger than Tokyo, and even bigger than Japan is the inside of your head. Don't ever surrender yourself, not to Japan, not to anything. You may think that what you're doing is for the sake of the nation, but let something take possession of you like that, and all you do is bring it down." Putting the nation above the people of that nation brings the entire nation down. Exploiting soldiers or workers for the notion of the country only leads to destruction. The book was written in 1908, 37 years before the end of World War II. It wouldn't be wrong to say Japan perished then, at least the Japan Natsume knew. Even then, I wouldn't say that he predicted this. He just saw the warning signs, and I love this about his writings and his view of Mount Fuji. It really shows that Japan, like any country, is never at any point defined by one notion. It really makes one reevaluate their own place once they realize this, as we realize the consuming issues of the world are not defined by our own thoughts. There are just as many views of Mount Fuji as there are people in the world. In Osamu Dazai's 100 Views of Mount Fuji, a technically fictional story, but obviously written from his point of view, he references Hokusai, who painted its sheer beauty, but laments on how it is now a tourist attraction. But it isn't as simple as that. It hasn't lost its beauty because of its popularity. The mountain is still undeniably the same. He calls the mountain vulgar. Dazai starts his story by explaining how Mount Fuji has its slopes exaggerated by artists, and is actually way less upright as it is made out to be. Some of Hokusai's renditions fairly resemble the Eiffel Tower, peaking at nearly 30 degrees, but the real Fuji is unmistakably obtuse, with long leisurely slopes. By no means do 117 north-south make for a very steep peak. He then goes on to describe that if he had lived in a different country and was suddenly plucked by a large eagle and dropped in front of Mount Fuji, he doubts he would actually be very impressed by the mountain. He wonders how much appeal the mountain would have if it weren't for the propaganda, as he calls it. The mountain is the source of exaggeration and appreciation for the sake of appreciation. Dazai even writes a scene where the narrator recalls being on a bus, and the driver announces that the mountain can be seen from the left side, and everyone without thought clamors to the left side of the bus to get a view of this mountain. I feel personally called out, as on the plane to Osaka I did exactly this when the pilot announced that Mount Fuji could be seen from the left side window. Back to the story. Meanwhile, the narrator focuses his attention on a cluster of flowers out the other side of the bus, a small and fleeting and fragile life form clinging to existence, displaying the same amount of beauty as the mountain, though not as appreciated. Even in Japan's modern-day pop culture, the mountain and Hokusai's painting appears everywhere, arguably watering down their respective beauty. We come to see Mount Fuji because that is just what one does. Yet this isn't the end of it either. Of course, Mount Fuji being an icon reproduced on end forever is not in itself a detriment. It is a towering and permanent structure able to be seen from great distances, hence why it can appear in the Great Wave off Kanagawa. Even before now, it had been seen by many people many times. The mountain can be endlessly used to make artistic statements because of its notoriety, not to mention how many versions of Hokusai's paintings there are. While there is room to hate commercialization, I can't deny how endearing it is to see artists place their own things that they love into the image, allowing it to become an interactive piece that everyone can play a part in. And isn't that not just amazing? Even into the modern day, the mountain is still used to depict many ideas, including the destruction of Mount Fuji is often used to reflect uneasiness and terror of the unknown, like in the long-running manga Yokohama Kaidashi Kikou by Hitoshi Ashinano, who uses the imagery of a dilapidated Mount Fuji as a quick way to underscore that his world takes place after a truly devastating event. The mountain is a permanent fixture of Japan, imagining its destruction as almost impossible, yet it is true that outside a human lifetime, the mountain will one day no longer exist. It is just perceived immortality. It reinforces that work's messages about the fleetingness of life and the change that happens. Nothing is permanent. We see the mountain explode open with the force of Godzilla in Godzilla vs. Mothra, a movie all about the ecological toll of business on the environment, and in Akira Kurosawa's Dreams, Mount Fuji melts away in flames to show a permanent structure losing its place in a world that has careened itself towards destruction, underscoring Akira Kurosawa's fears on humanity's disregard for the world. Mount Fuji crumbles with humanity. At the end of Dazai's short story 100 Views of Mount Fuji, the narrator is asked to take a photo of two women on vacation. He takes the camera and focuses in on the women with Mount Fuji in the background. He becomes dissatisfied with the shot. He says, "I was having a difficult time aiming, and finally swept the two girls out of the picture entirely, allowing Fuji and Fuji alone to fill the lens. Goodbye, Mount Fuji." This was in the 1930s, meaning that these women wouldn't even know he removed them from the frame until they had the pictures developed later, where the narrator of the story would never be. This speaks to something that not even the narrator of 100 Views of Mount Fuji could deny. Mount Fuji is massive, and it can be seen from everywhere. Everyone around it has a connection to it. The mountain does not hide itself based on how we see it. It exists outside of humanity, and it is what captures the narrator's attention. While he removes the humans from the frame to enhance this point, Hokusai includes humanity in the picture to illustrate this point, to juxtapose the indifference of Mount Fuji, a towering and formidable structure like the wave, even though the wave is much more fleeting, showing both their undeniable prowess and power over humanity, thus to cling onto this world in the face of nature. The painting remains popular for expressing the turbulence of life, something every human knows. Even in this woodblock, our eyes look to the waves. The people blend in and are barely perceivable unless we focus in on them, but if we do, we catch a glimpse of humanity in the world. In fact, many of Hokusai's 36 views of Mount Fuji include people in the work as well, viewing Mount Fuji with admiration or just walking past it, or not noticing it under a larger threat. Yet it is always there, able to be viewed from any perspective, and no two perspectives are ever the same. It's why we can paint it again and again every single day and never grow tired of it. Trying to come up with a concrete narrative to this woodblock or to Mount Fuji would be a disservice to what Mount Fuji actually shows us. It is artistry. It is meant to be interpreted by each person based on how they view the world, based on their own experiences, and what each person takes is special to them.